I'm Jade Jones, solar analyst at GTM Research. Welcome to the next panel entitled The Future of U.S. Module Supply. Now, given the uncertainty of the latest trade case and the impact that it can have on the way that the U.S. market is supplied modules, there lays an opportunity to reassess the U.S. supply landscape, namely questioning where can the U.S. market get the technology it wants at the prices it wants from bankable suppliers. Will the U.S. supply landscape stay static to what it was in years past, or will it change moving forward? Luckily, I have these four panelists to my left to help answer these questions. Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining. To get started, if we could quickly introduce yourselves, name, company, and also role.
Great. Good morning. Thank you for having me here. I'm Tamara Montague with JA Solar, newly named Vice President of Sales, and very happy to be here. JA is a global manufacturer. We have over 9 gigawatts of cells installed globally, over 3 gigawatts of modules installed globally. Our current manufacturing capacity in China is 3 gigawatts, modules and cells. We are focused on providing a high quality product to our customer and being responsive to our customer needs, listening to what they're asking for from the products and delivering them on time and within their budget.
Good morning. My name is Conrad Burke. I'm head of marketing for DuPont's photovoltaics division based in Silicon Valley. We are a supplier of advanced materials which goes into the manufacturing of solar cells and solar panels. So we're an upstream supplier in the food chain, if you will, in the solar space.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Lee at Isola. We're a Shanghai-based module supplier, and among other things, I'm based out of San Francisco office. I'm the director of sales and marketing for our U.S. business. Isola, we are the 6th largest module supplier in the world. We have about 14 gigawatts worth of products delivered worldwide since 2008. Of which about approximately 5 gigawatts is modules. We have multiple offices throughout the US and about 9 warehouses, including Hawaii, which makes us a little bit different than a typical supplier. And we have our own, of course, the modules, the micros, and the single-phase and three-phase string inverters, as well as carrying third-party brands in the inverters and the racking space. And we do not care about our customers. I'm just kidding.
How do you follow that? I'm not sure. Thanks for coming. We'll be here again next week. I'm Matt Card. I'm Vice President of Global Sales and Marketing for Soneva, headquartered out of suburban Atlanta, Georgia, and as many of you are aware, opening a new manufacturing facility in Saginaw, Michigan right now. We are the oldest and largest U.S.-born, U.S.-owned solar module and cell manufacturer, started out of Georgia Tech. Primarily operational here in the U.S., though we certainly have a global presence as well.
Great, thanks guys. To get started, Jeff, if I could ask you to give a quick update on what happened in 2014 with the tariff situation and key points to watch right now as the deals close.
Sure, thanks Jade. Not to take too much time, but as most of you, if not all of you, may be aware, back in 2012, Solar World launched a trade case against Chinese suppliers, and the long end of the story is that any product manufactured using China-based cells have been subject to a substantial tariff since 2012. And there was a new trade case that was launched towards end of last year or beginning of this year to try to block out the Taiwanese cell supply, which the Chinese module manufacturers sort of went through to avoid the Chinese cell tariff requirements. So now we're looking at the final decision sometime next week. The preliminary decision may come as early as this week, but we're looking at Chinese modules being blocked out of the U.S. altogether as well. So that's sort of where we are. It has introduced a substantial amount of uncertainty in the supply landscape towards the beginning of the year. I think we're a little bit more stable now with different people doing different things. So I'm happy to be on this panel to discuss what some of my colleagues are doing to get around those things.
Yes, absolutely. And I think a key question that everybody's asking right now after you gave that brief description is how has the 2014 trade case changed Renosola's strategy into the U.S. in 2014, and what can we expect in 2015?
Sure. So to a certain extent, I don't want this to kind of come across the wrong way, but we Renosola, we don't really care because we're absolutely future-proof. We have strategically decided a few years ago not to expand our China production capacity beyond the 1.2 gigawatts on an annualized basis. So as of today, we have more than 1.1 gigawatts worth of module supply coming from 7 different countries around the world. And we started doing this years ago because we saw the European tariff coming. We saw the India domestic content hoopla and Australia and the US and everything. So as of today, Solar World management in Germany would have to add 7 more countries to block us out of the US market. And by then, we might just as well might have 20 more countries producing modules for us for the US market. So yeah, we're pretty much future-proof. And we have successfully transitioned over. We turned off the China spigot earlier in the year, and now we're fully non-China.
And I think a key question that has currently come up recently is that in Q3 2014, Renosola had announced that it was going to increase its OEM capacity, which would make them be able to ship more modules to the US. But in Q4, Renosola announced that they were going to delay the expansion. And my question is, why?
Good question. I don't know.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I could kind of sort of conjecture as to why. I think the European market has been kind of going down faster than anyone had really expected, well, maybe at least as far as we're concerned. So there's some variations there. I think and part of that also it has to do with the European trade settlement, which established a price floor and a volume cap. We really lucked out last year and this year because we have our European supply, quite a bit of it, going into European market, and then we had the Chinese cap going into the market as well. So our exposure perhaps was a little bit more than others. But I think as far as our OEM strategy is concerned, call it contract manufacturing or outsourced, whatever the name may be. But I think according to our plan, we were expecting more ramp up. But I think right now we're pretty comfortable where we are with the global 2.3 gigawatts, and we will continue to add additional capacity outside of China as the business needs arise. So we're very flexible. I think we have the luxury of being able to adapt to the changing market dynamics worldwide on a pretty quick basis. So yeah, we might have planned for something, but if things change, then we can adapt very quickly as well.
So it's weakness in the EU rather than the US right now that's driving that OEM capacity
That's
stall.
probably, I mean, I don't want to just blame everything on the EU, but
Yeah.
I think sometimes things ramp up faster, sometimes slower, so. Yeah.
All right, Tamara, I want to ask you the initial question as well. So how has the 2014 tariff changed JA's business strategy into the US, and what can we expect in 2015?
Great. So it's actually been a silver lining for us in that rather than buying cells from our competitors in Taiwan to build into our modules for the US market, we went back to JA cells. So we got to go back to our own high quality, higher efficiency cells that we manufacture in China in our own facility where we have tightly managed controls, and then we're able to build them and ship them into the US market. We know the 2012 tariff rate, 29.18%, and with having one of the world leading cost structures, by the time you add a reasonable margin, shipping, and build that in, it is a cost competitive for the US market solution.
So a lot of Chinese manufacturers, as you all may know, are using an all-Chinese product to ship into the US instead of using Taiwanese cells as before. What can we expect in 2015 in changes of strategy? Will there be a change in where you get your supply or any other business strategies into the US?
Sure. So for part of it depends a little bit on the outcome of the trade case next week, but we have been investigating solutions that include North America manufacturing, that includes Southeast Asia manufacturing. And so each of those have different attributes that will service the US market, and so depending on how the trade case gets finally decided will depend on whether all of those or which ones of those come online for the U.S. market.
And I think that's something interesting to note is the manufacturing sector is on the cusp of manufacturing expansion. So will these manufacturers expand outside of China, or will they expand to rest of the world locations where they could reduce operating costs and such? And I think that's a key question moving forward for JA. If you have any comments right now, I would
Sure,
welcome
yes.
them.
So we are expanding in China as well as looking at the options that are expansion outside. And so we supply modules globally. The U.S. market is a small market for us as a company. We see the opportunity here as very large. It's a very fast-growing market. And we've spent the last couple years since we began manufacturing modules rather than just cells of establishing our portfolio of, the famous word bankability, right, in the U.S. and how we define it and what's important. So making sure we do the third-party testing, making sure that we are ensuring that our product is going to, last for the long term, and additionally, being very fiscally conservative. We have one of the best financial positions amongst our peers. We have, closely managed our costs and been careful when we've undergone an expansion so that we are keeping our debt ratio very tightly managed.
Absolutely. And Matt, I want to get to you. As the U.S. manufacturer, how has this trade case affected 2014? Was it a boom? And what can we expect in 2015?
I think the trade case is made for interesting theater. And here's why I say that. The U.S. is, compared to many global markets, it is just now starting to mature. It's been a relatively immature market, certainly compared to Europe, certainly compared to some other places. And as we go through this maturation as a buying market, what we're starting to see, and what we were starting to see before the tariff actions started occurring, was a change in buyer mindset. Now we know price is still a significant driver, but if you go back 24 months, some in the room may disagree with me, but certainly as a module manufacturer, and certainly I think my colleagues would agree, as price continued to fall at unnatural rates, price was the driver. As markets mature, price is not the driver anymore. You focus on quality, you also focus on performance. So, we produce a monocrystalline product. It's typically fairly high power compared to the general produced product in the marketplace. We've been seeing a shift for the better part of 18 to 24 months anyhow, back towards a buyer that certainly values price, but is also willing to put some premium on quality, and also put a significant premium on power. And so price is not an absolute. Price in the combination with power is a much more relevant benchmark. So we've seen significant growth, the kabuki of tariff aside. It's up for smarter minds than me to decide whether the tariff's fair or not fair. I think the U.S. government has said there's certainly issue there. But what we've focused on is controlling the things we can control, which is lowering our manufacturing cost and, more importantly, increasing our power footprint. Today we're producing a 330-watt module in a monocrystalline format that certainly carries a higher price premium than many of my competitors' modules do. But when you start looking at the metrics of that and how that performs in certain applications, specifically distributed generation, there's real value to that power. And I think as the U.S. market has matured, what you're seeing is a recognition that price alone is not a driver. And I think we as an industry, module manufacturers specifically, because they've seemed to have led the suicidal race to zero. But what we'll understand is this is not just a question of let's knock 3 more cents a watt off the panel, let's knock 4 more cents a watt off the panel, let's a week pass so we're going to knock another dime off the panel. That certainly is what 2012, 2011 looked like. We're starting to focus on how do you build a high quality product and how do you build a very powerful product, because that combination with price does justify. So we were seeing that shift occur in our model, and I think we were a benefit of that before the tariff came in. We were growing our capacity as fast as we could possibly grow it, with a fairly significant backlog of business. We've announced, and my timing could have been better. We announced the day before the preliminary ruling that we were greatly expanding our moduling capabilities in Michigan, and everyone thought we knew something a day in advance. The reality is those were some fairly strategic decisions that were in play long before the theater of tariff came along. So I'd argue that the tariff is interesting and it's kept people engaged in the discussion, but what I think it's done is it's kept people engaged in the discussion to realize this is a maturing market. And maturing markets do not live on price alone. Maturing markets live on where all components in the supply chain, from designer to manufacturer to installer to investor, can make a fair profit. And we're seeing that in the U.S. So I'm absolutely encouraged to hear about the expansion of my competitors. I'll love to hear about the expansion of those competitors into U.S. jobs. Right now, we're certainly doing that. But I think as the market continues to mature, we will see U.S. manufacturing in a renaissance, particularly in solar.
And part of what is interesting about these kind of innovations with module manufacturers are product innovations. So I believe with your company, you guys are doing a financial package which will help supplement your module manufacturing products. How do you see that as playing a crucial part in growing significant supply in terms of megawatts into the U.S.? Is that a significant part for a U.S. supply or someone trying to supply into the U.S.?
So our tactic has been to focus very clearly on the things we can control. We're not the size of some of our competitors. So we focus very specifically on the science. We come out of a research institute, one of the most renowned in the world is our heritage. So R&D is key to us. The work we started for our company at Georgia Tech has continued into our products. More so than focusing on financial packages or anything else, we're focusing on how do we optimize the technology. You certainly want to do that not in a cost unabated way, because price rising and power rising don't gain you anything. Cost lowering and power rising and rising significantly gain you a significant amount. So our focus over the last 2 years, as tariff and everything else has come on, and as the U.S. market started to mature, has been control the things we can control. Focus on optimizing manufacturing cost while optimizing power. And that's what leads to a price that sells within cents of everything else in the world, but at power ratios 15, 20 watts higher.
And Conrad, I just want to get your comments pretty briefly, because we were talking a little bit before about module manufacturing and the supply landscape, and you had a pretty good analogy, and you could just slip that in.
Thanks, Jade. But I just want to add, by the way, I like that soundbite, the kabuki of tariffs. That's pretty apt. But it's interesting. So DuPont is a U.S. headquartered company, but operating internationally in pretty much every country in the world. But in the PV space in particular, we supply to the who's who of solar cell and solar module manufacturing companies. And certainly, we would like to see this thing resolved quickly. And we're big proponents of fair and open trade. And this the ambiguity around tariffs has certainly not helped the industry at all. In fact, I would go as far as to say, of all the people we've come across internationally, also including here in the United States, I have yet to really hear any strong voices supporting any of these tariffs. So we certainly would like to see them resolved. But in terms of the landscape, so we bring a little bit of a different perspective. We're about, as I said earlier, we're as far upstream as you can get. So what we do in the PV space is probably not as obvious to many people in the audience. What we ship out of our company is in jars or is in rolls, and they ultimately end up in the manufacturing of a solar panel, if you will. To give you some examples, like the silver paste that's used to extract the electrical current out of a solar cell, that you see those lines on the top of it, so that would be a DuPont material. Or the back sheet that protects the panel for 30 years on the back, that white sheet is made by DuPont. So those are some of the things, but we have a perspective because we do interact with all the major manufacturers in China that make all these products. So we can form viewpoints and perspectives, but certainly I think the tariffs haven't helped in terms of a cost structure, but nonetheless, we think that market dynamics will continue to move this market forward. I don't think we're in a position to say, I don't think we're in the state today where we say these could really severely disrupt the overall market growth. On the contrary, I think we think the market will continue to grow quite nicely, but it does add extra added financial pressure and burden on manufacturers of these types of products. There's no question of that. So we'd certainly like to see this resolved pretty quickly. But in terms of, we're picking up signatures of discussions amongst solar companies from China to do some manufacturing in the United States. To what degree that actually stands for, we don't know. We're not privy to that. But there certainly seems to be some levels of discussion, at least at the module level, of doing more manufacturing in the US, which may help that process along. I am happy to say I think we've gone through a kind of a quiet period of a number of years as, quite frankly, all these companies have been in survival mode. There hasn't been a lot of R&D and a lot of innovation in terms of new products. But that has changed a little bit of recent. We're seeing a lot more new R&D from companies like JA Solar and others that are actually developing new, very exciting products, which I think really plays well into higher efficiency and higher power and so forth. But certainly, I think tariffs will add a little bit extra pressure that's probably not welcome.
I think to that point, it's a little bit along the lines of like, will there be will efficiency upgrades in the U.S. be limited because of price constraints and gross margin constraints? In terms of higher efficiency technology, typically it's a little bit more costly. So will the need to drive down costs and actually get a margin, will that limit the amount of technology into the U.S.? And is that more towards your point? Will there be more significant? Will there have to be more significant R&D?
I think there's going to be continuous evolutionary improvement, like there has been over the last couple of decades in incremental improvements in efficiencies or power out from solar cells and solar panels. The step change in terms of a brand new architecture is a lot more problematic. That does create a lot more uncertainty because there's a lot more investment required for those types of cells and modules. But on the other hand, I think companies like DuPont and others, we play a role in helping improve those efficiencies, whether it's in the material, particularly in the materials, because materials do play an important, if not a critical role in terms of increasing the efficiencies and performance and the longevity and durability of these products. So some of that are responsibility has and will continue to be on the material suppliers like DuPont. So we'll play our part. Module and cell manufacturers will play their part. So I think we'll continue to see a movement. If you look at efficiencies of solar panels, just on materials alone, they've doubled over the last 12 years. So and I think that will continue. But a step change in terms of a brand new architecture of solar cells will certainly will require a lot more investment on the part of solar cell manufacturers and panel manufacturers.
And I think a key next point to cover is prices. So what the U.S. market has known and what the global market has known, that up until 2010 to 2013, prices dramatically fell because of input cost reduction. What happened in 2014, particularly in the U.S., what drove prices to be flat to kind of up, depending on what market you're really looking at, was the tariff situation. In half one 2014, it was high Taiwanese cell costs. Half two 2014, it was that tariff situation, and all Chinese manufacturers were using all Chinese products. So it was that 2012 tariff that was applied. What are we going to see with prices in 2015? What can the market expect? And Jeff, I'll go to you.
Sure. I think a lot of that really depends on how much margin compression our China-based peers are willing to take. As it's very plainly clear, even the best pricing in manufacturing costs out of China is in the, let's say, high 40s to low 50s. And then you add on all the SG&A and various transportation and this and that, and then you pay the 35% tariff on top of it. Then you're very quickly getting into the 70s plus range. So I think as an industry, that's sort of setting the bar. And I've talked to some foreign manufacturers that are looking to take advantage of the situation and to enter the U.S. market, and they have completely unrealistic expectations of 80 cents, 90 cents, and we have our colleagues selling high efficiency modules for less than that. So I think there's a little bit of a disjoint in terms of the local dynamics in the U.S. market as far as the pricing is concerned. And going into 2015, I think MJ mentioned prior to this panel that there's only so much that the manufacturing can squeeze out the cost, and we are continuing to see some of those trends with high pressure fluorized bed reaction types of processes for the polysilicon, and continued innovation on the wafer side, as well as obviously the cell efficiency gains and material cost reduction, and as well as the reliability improvements on the module packaging side. So with all that said, I think the pricing will continue to trend down, because I think everyone who's utilizing whatever strategies that they've set upon towards the early to middle of this year, I think most foreign manufacturers will be able to continue that on that path and hopefully continue to drive down the cost. But if once again our German management colleagues decide to file another suit, then we're all going to have to go on another kabuki theater show, I suppose.
Absolutely. So what will be driving manufacturer or final prices in the U.S. in 2015 will be costs. Tamara, do you have any comments on that?
I'd
from
agree
the
with
Chinese?
Jeff that really the driver we're going to see is going to be a lot of improvements of efficiency. As we see a lot of the transition from modules based around the poly at 310 to be up at 315, so that helps drive down the cost. So that's kind of the same cost curve driver as before. Additionally, as you look at manufacturing outside of China, seeing how those costs that aren't tariffed compare into the market. So, for example, you take the 50-cent cost plus or minus 5 cents that you see out of China, you add on the margin, the shipping. You can compare that to, say, in the Southeast Asia region, you're probably adding about maybe 10% off onto your cost. You're looking at North American manufacturing, you're probably adding 20 or 30% onto your cost. That's kind of in line with the tariff where it is currently. So, it's going to be sort of where your costs are going to be where you see them today, pretty much, just efficiency roadmap driving.
So efficiency roadmap, and what we know from efficiency driving costs is that it's really incremental efficiency improvements typically for manufacturers. They do grow year over year, but they have a very sometimes incremental effect on the manufacturing depending on what improvements are made. But you did give some really interesting commentary on how regional prices may vary depending on where you manufacture. And I do want to get to questions. I only have a couple of minutes. But if you guys have any additional questions or additive comments right now.
Just to extend on the comment on cost, we also think that the cost will continue to come down. I think the thought of costs or prices going up, which we've seen over a number of years, just blips, that will certainly not be a long-term trend. If anything, they're going to continue to head downward. But I am pleased to think or see that the conversation has matured a lot more, and it's a lot of marketing, quite frankly, too, amongst module manufacturers and developers, that they sell value and sell not just the cost, but also the fact that it's really down to three things. It's lifetime, how long these things are supposed to last, an operation on the field, efficiency, how much power you're going to get out of these things, and the cost, of course. We've talked about that. But we sometimes get fixated on the cost piece, on the dollar per watt, and commoditizing the product, if you will. But the most important fact is how much kilowatt hours you're going to get out of this system over 20, 25, 30 years. That's really the most important thing. And I think it's good to see, and it's refreshing to see, and I've heard it over some of the conversations here at this conference, that particularly on the finance, insurance, and the more and more downstream you go away from panels, if you will, there's a lot more mature and responsible discussions going on, and demands, if you will, that yes, I can probably buy a very cheap panel and $1 per watt, you can compare them, stack them all up, but in reality, I want to make sure that what I'm buying is good enough to last and withstand the test of time, and I get my money back or make money on this project, whether it's small, medium, or large. So I think we've come a long way compared to a couple of years ago, where we would have been completely fixated on cost and cost of modules and dollar per watt. It certainly progressed in the right direction in my mind.
Great, guys.
Can I make one comment? Jeff said something really interesting, and I think it's useful for us, particularly as an installation community, to remember. He made a comment, said somewhere where prices go depend on how much more appetite there is for module manufacturers to eat even further into what are already relatively low margins. There's a cautionary message there, and I think we share this. I think the previous presenter shared this as well. There's not another 70% that can be eked out of module cost. That's what we've experienced over the last 4 to 5 years, is 70%. There are other areas, and that's been the easy drug, right? There's been a lot of people that have been willing to knock another nickel, knock another nickel, knock another nickel, and then you're 70% reduction in prices. There's not another 70% in the module. We need to be looking as an industry at soft cost, at P&I cost. And in the U.S., we're still 2.5 times the cost of Germany. There are 18,000 authorizing jurisdictions in the U.S. compared to, I believe, 2 in Germany. So there are other areas where we can see quantum improvement in continuing to lower cost than just the cost of equipment. That drug can't be available forever. And so as we mature, we're going to have to look at all the components there, not only products, but installation costs, system costs, interconnect costs, permitting costs, and there's room for significant efficiency as a holistic group.
Okay. All right, I only have 3 minutes. Thank you guys for your additional comments. That was great. Any questions out in the audience? Oh, come on, guys. All right, right over here.
Hi, is it working?
Yep.
Okay. This question is directed to Sunniva. I'd like to understand how much of your product is actually made in the United States, how much is made in China, or where the cells come from, where the stringing takes place. I mean, I'm happy to have a made in America product, but I want to understand what that really means.
So as of this year, we'll be virtually 100% in the United States and North America. As the market has shifted for us over the last 18, 24 months, we started out very much with a global manufacturing strategy. All of our cells are made in Georgia. We've manufactured both in the U.S. and in Asia. And as we've seen the market shifting to a higher quality product, and we look at the cost of moving materials back and forth, it became pretty obvious to us over this year, and that was my comment I made earlier, that we can compete with U.S. manufacturing. There's a real cost to capital when you're putting things on boats and moving them around the world. And so manufacturing here between our manufacturing facilities in Atlanta, our new factories in Michigan, and our also other North American, U.S. and North American contract manufacturing capabilities. This year, by the end of this year, we'll be virtually 100% inside North America, and the vast majority of that inside the United States, from soup to nuts.
So you were previously stringing the panels in China, is that right?
We've done both. Over our lifetime, we've strung in the U.S., we've strung in China. We set into this market as a global player, and as markets have adjusted to where the U.S. has become the third largest, it seemed to be very natural for the U.S. company to be in its own backyard. But we've strung in the U.S., we string in the U.S. today, and we've strung in Asia.
So all your cells do come from Georgia, though?
That's correct.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Can I add another perspective to what Matt was saying? Often it gets lost in the somewhat political debate of tariffs. In the United States realm of manufacturing, in the manufacturing of solar panels, while they may take place offshore, a lot of the big materials or tools are actually made in the United States. I'll give you some. Well, we would be one example. DuPont makes a lot of the materials in the United States. We have a $200 million capacity expansion in Ohio where we make the backsheet material, Tedlar. Applied Materials, which is a major manufacturer of tools that actually equip the factories in China, is a U.S. company manufacturing in the U.S. 3M is another example. Hemlock in the Midwest, which makes polysilicon, which is the precursor to make wafers for solar cells. So sometimes gets lost in the dialogue. It's worth mentioning that there is a lot of manufacturing, the PV supply chain in the United States.
Perfect.
And I think we're all looking at that.
Yeah.
As markets shift, we're reallocating where resources sit. We believe those should be heavily in the U.S. Some of my colleagues believe they're in other places, but that's going to be a continuing trend. This is a global industry.
Great, guys. Thanks. We're out of time. Let's give my panelists a round of applause. Yeah. All right, thank you.